Snow had always been a part of their lives, but that winter felt different. As if the sky itself had grown tired and sank lower over the town. The streets of the small Canadian community narrowed under high white walls, banks of plowed snow turning every alley into a corridor of ice. The wind cut across the river, threaded its way between houses, and slipped under doors, no matter how carefully they were sealed. In the narrow two-story house at the end of Willow Street, Maria knelt in front of an old oil heater, rubbing her fingers together and watching the blue flame sputter. The heater groaned, the metal ticking with fatigue. She turned the knob just a little higher, even though she knew the next gas bill would be another weight around her neck. Behind her, on a faded couch, Emily and Jake huddled under the same blanket. Emily, 8 years old, kept one arm wrapped around her little brother, who was 6 and perpetually cold since the autumn cough had never really left him. Their breath fogged in the air, a thin ghost of warmth that disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. "Mum, can we have something hot?" Emily's voice was small, polite, as if she were afraid that asking might hurt someone. "In a minute, sweetheart," Maria answered, forcing cheerfulness into her words. "The water's almost boiling." "Well, make tea." She had already boiled water twice that day. Tea leaves were nearly gone. She was stretching them so far that the color barely changed the water. But hot water itself could trick a child's body into believing it had eaten. The warmth slid down, heavy and comforting. Sometimes that was enough to make them sleepy. Jake coughed, shuddering under the blanket. Maria rose, her knees aching, and crossed the room. She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. Warm, but not too warm. A lingering fever, sharp and fragile. "You okay, buddy?" she whispered. He nodded too quickly, eyes big and hopeful. "Are we gonna have the cinnamon cereal again?" They had finished the cereal 2 weeks ago. The empty box was still in the cupboard because throwing it away felt like admitting defeat. "Not tonight," she said softly. "But soon. I promise." He smiled anyway, because he believed her. Children believed promises the way they believed in sunrise. Behind them, above the small fireplace, a photograph watched over the room. In it, Maria stood in the summer sun, hair loose, dress bright, holding a baby Emily on her hip. Next to her, a man with tan skin and tired, green eyes had one arm around her waist and the other lifting a beer toward the camera. His smile was crooked, as if halfway through a joke. That was Daniel, the name that still burned when it came to her mind. He had been gone for 7 months. He had left in late spring, when the snow had finally surrendered and the river was free again. Packaged his clothes, muttered something about needing air and "I can't anymore," then turned the doorknob and stepped out into a brighter world that, apparently, still had room for him. Maria remembered the noise of the latch closing like the snap of a bone. The debts had stayed. The rent had stayed. The children, of course, had stayed, looking at her with the same eyes that used to look at him. At first, she had told herself he would come back. He always had before, after arguments, after nights when he disappeared with friends and beer and came home smelling of cigarettes and regret. This time, though, the days became weeks, then months. The hope frayed, then fell apart. She took extra shifts at the motel, changing sheets and scrubbing bathrooms until her shoulders burned, and her fingers cracked from bleach. She cleaned houses on weekends, walking from one side of town to the other with a bucket and a rag. She counted coins in the late evening, at the small kitchen table, while the children slept in the room above her. Every time she thought she saw a pattern that might save them, a bill arrived that broke it apart. One week in November, the heater stopped working. She called the landlord, and he said he would send someone when he could. She had heard that answer before. The repairman showed up 8 days later, fixed the heater in 20 minutes, and left a slip of paper with a service fee that made her heart sink. By December, The cupboards were mostly empty. Pasta, rice, a few tins of tomatoes. The food bank helped, but the lines were long and the shelves thin. Everyone seemed to be struggling that winter. The economy had dipped, then dipped again. People whispered about layoffs. Shops closed earlier. Lights went out behind store windows and never came on again. Maria's body began to fail her. A cough started in her chest, deep and rattling. She ignored it, taking extra layers to work, swallowing hot water with lemon when she could afford a lemon. When the motel cut hours for staff, she pretended not to notice the manager's eyes skimming past her name on the schedule. Less work meant less money. Less money meant less food. Less food meant kids with thinner faces and more prominent bones. At night, when the children slept, she would stand at the small window in the kitchen and look out across the river. The moonlight turned the ice into a sheet of dull silver, stretched between dark banks lined with black trees. Somewhere beyond those trees, the cliff rose above the water, a natural wall of rock worn smooth by time and snow. People from town called it Angel's Drop, because from certain angles it looked like a pair of wings folded into stone. It was not a kind name. That winter, her prayers changed. At first, they had been requests. Please, God, help me find more work. Please, keep my children healthy. Please, touch Daniel's heart and bring him home. When the prayers seemed to go unanswered, they turned into arguments, then accusations. Are you there? She whispered once, fingernails biting into her palm as she watched her breath fog the glass. Or did you leave too? Silence was the only answer. The river did not stir. The sky did not open. With the silence came thoughts she did not want. Thoughts that arrived late, when the house was asleep and her bones felt hollow. When she stared at the numbers on unpaid notices and knew she could not stretch herself more than she already had. Thoughts that started with what if and ended with impossible logic. If they were with God, they would not be cold. If they were in heaven, they would not know hunger. If they were gone, she would not have to watch them suffer. The first time such a thought completed itself, she recoiled as if she had touched fire. She pressed her fist to her mouth so hard her lips split. No, she whispered into her knuckles, no. I would never. She tried to bury it. But thoughts like those are seeds that find every crack. With each night of feverish coughing, each letter folded in red warning, each thin dinner of overcooked rice, the idea returned and pressed itself against her skull. One afternoon, she left work early because she could not stop shivering. The motel manager frowned, scribbled something on a clipboard, and turned away. Outside, snowflakes drifted down in thick, slow spirals, covering footprints almost as soon as they were made. Maria walked home with the collar of her coat up, the wind burning her eyes. At the corner near the river, she saw a notice board covered in flyers. Lost dog, piano lessons, church potluck. On one side, a newspaper clipping had been pinned. A story from another province about a woman who had driven her car into a lake, with her children inside. The headline called it tragedy. The article mentioned depression, financial hardship, a note that spoke of love and desperation. Maria stared at the photograph of the woman, a small image grainy with ink, and felt as if she were looking into a warped mirror. The woman's eyes carried the same terrified exhaustion she saw in her own. When she caught herself in reflective surfaces, beneath the photograph, a quote from a relative read, she believed they would be safer with God than with the world. Snow landed on the paper, melting slowly. Maria's throat closed. She stepped back, nearly slipping on the icy pavement, and hurried away, heart pounding. The thought that she could ever do something like that terrified her. The thought that she only understood it too well terrified her more. Days bled into each other, indistinguishable in their monotony of cold and scarcity. Emily's shoes developed holes. Maria stuffed them with cardboard and told Emily it was an extra layer for warmth. Jake's cough worsened. When she finally took him to the clinic, the nurse listened to his chest, lips pressed thin, and said, "If this gets worse, you'll need to bring him back. Pneumonia is nothing to play with." The prescription they gave her cost more than she had in her wallet. She bought half of it, promising herself she would get the rest when she could. On the walk home, Jake leaned against her hip, small hand curled into her coat pocket, his breath rough and uneven. "Mom?" he asked. "Yes, baby. Is God really watching us?" She froze for a fraction of a second. The sky above them was a colorless lid. The snow under their boots squeaked with each step. "Yes," she said, "because any other answer would crush him too quickly." "He is." "Then why is it so cold?" he murmured, more to himself than to her. That night, after the children were asleep, Maria sat at the table with the last of the unpaid bills and the remainder of the prescription slip. The numbers blurred. Her chest hurt with every breath. She laid her head on folded arms and whispered, "I can't do this. I can't." "If you're watching, you see that him at the end." Tears slid sideways into her hair. In the next room, Emily turned in her sleep and muttered something about sunshine. Maria squeezed her eyes shut. A strange calm seeped into her bones, heavy and unnatural, like the quiet that comes just before a storm breaks. An idea rose again in her mind, familiar now, no longer knocking, but standing in the doorway. She tried one last time to push it away. It did not move. Instead, it spoke in a voice that sounded dangerously like love. "They won't suffer anymore. They won't be hungry anymore. You will give them to the only one who can truly care for them." Her hands trembled. She pressed them together in prayer, though the words that followed were not the ones she had been taught as a child. "If I give them to you," she whispered, barely breathing, "will you take them? Will you hold them? Will you make it gentle?" The silence that answered was not empty. It was deep and wide and terrifying. In that silence, she mistook the absence of a reply for consent. The next day, the cold sharpened. The temperature plunged, and thin frost crystals formed on the inside of their bedroom window. Maria wrapped the children in extra sweaters before school, and kissed their foreheads longer than usual. "After school, don't go anywhere," she told Emily. "Come straight home. I have something special to show you this evening." Emily's face brightened despite her chapped lips. "Like a surprise?" "Yes," Maria said. "Like a surprise." All day at the motel, she moved through her tasks as if underwater. Sheets tucked themselves. Toilets scrubbed themselves. Co-workers spoke. She heard only fragments. Her chest ached with each breath, and under the ache, another feeling grew, something like inevitability. After her shift, instead of going home right away, she walked to the cliff. Angel's Drop looked different up close. The trees thinned as she approached, giving way to a rough, wind-bitten slope where rock pushed through snow. The cliff itself rose like a dark edge, its face sheer, its top a narrow platform that jutted over the frozen river below. The ice there was thinner, the current treacherous, hidden under a deceptive sheen. The wind on the cliff was stronger, unbroken by buildings or walls. It shoved at her, tugging her coat, trying to turn her back. She pushed forward until she stood near the edge and looked down. The river far below was a muted strip of gray, barely visible in the fading light. Her stomach lurched. The distance seemed both immense and not nearly enough. She imagined two small bodies falling through that cold air. Her mind recoiled, then forced itself to keep imagining, to finish the horrible picture. A splash, or no splash at all if the ice held darkness closing over them. Her knees weakened. She crouched and grabbed a rock with gloved fingers, using it as an anchor. "If you want to stop me," she whispered into the wind, "this is your chance." Nothing changed. The wind did not cease. The clouds did not part. Her breath turned to vapor and vanished. By the time she walked back home, her cheeks were raw and streaked with salt. She moved quickly, as if speed could make what she planned less real. Emily and Jake were waiting by the door, coats on, hats crooked, eyes bright. "Mom, what's the surprise?" Emily asked. "You'll see," Maria said, trying to smile. Her lips felt stiff. "We're going for a walk. A special walk. Bring your scarves." Jake bounced on his toes, forgetting his cough for the moment. "Are we going to see the lights, mister? Dawson at school said sometimes you can see green lights in the sky in winter." "Maybe," Maria murmured. She led them through the town, past the dark windows of the grocery store, past the church with its locked doors and snow-covered steps, past the last row of houses where the street lights ended. The world beyond the town was quieter, the snow untouched except for animal tracks. A truck passed them once on the main road, its headlights briefly washing over their figures. The driver frowned, noticing a woman and two small children walking toward the woods so late. But he had a delivery schedule to keep and kept going. Farther up the road, behind a cluster of bare maples, a solitary man stood smoking, his breath and smoke mixing into the cold air. He watched the three figures as they disappeared into the trees and felt a small unease tug his gut. The kind of instinct most people learn to ignore. He crushed his cigarette under his boot and turned back to his own path. Maria's boots sank deep into the snow with each step. Emily and Jake followed in her footprints, their smaller feet slipping occasionally. Jake coughed, the sound dampened by the thick air. "Mom, it's really cold," Emily said at last, breath shaking. "How much further?" "Not far," Maria answered. "We're almost there." The trees thinned around them, and the sky opened. They stepped onto the plateau above the river, the whole world falling away suddenly at their feet. "Wow," Jake whispered, eyes wide. "It's so high." From the edge, the town's faint lights twinkled to their left, distant and small. The river below them was a dark ribbon. The sky above was heavy with clouds, but small rents in the gray revealed stars, sharp and indifferent. Maria's heart pounded so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Her vision blurred around the edges. The wind pushed, tugging at the children's scarves. "Come here," she said gently. "Right here. Careful. Stay close to me." They obeyed, trusting as always. Emily stepped to her left, closer to the edge, peering down. Jake clung to Maria's coat with both hands. "It's scary," he said, "but pretty." Maria swallowed. Her mouth was so dry she could barely form words. "Sometimes," she managed, "the scariest places are where you can see the most clearly." "What are we going to see?" Emily asked. She could have turned back then. There was still time to say, "Nothing, just the view. Let's go home." There was still time to step away, to pretend this had been nothing more than a strange walk on a cold evening. But the thought of going back to the house, back to the empty cupboards and unpaid bills, back to the slow torture of watching her children's faces grow thinner, pressed on her like a physical weight. She knelt, placing one hand on each of their shoulders. The fabric of their coats felt thin under her fingers. "Listen to me," she said, voice trembling. "Whatever happens next, remember that I love you. I have always loved you. Mom." Emily's eyes searched her face. There was the first flicker of real fear there now, a dawning understanding that something was wrong. Jake coughed, then whispered, "Are we going somewhere?" "Yes," Maria said. "You're going somewhere better." The words tore her throat on their way out. She closed her eyes, inhaled the sharp air, and, in a movement that she would relive in her mind for the rest of her life, she shifted her weight and pushed. The children's feet slipped on the snow, their bodies tilted, pulled by gravity toward the empty space beyond the edge. Emily cried out, a sound of shock, not yet fear's full scream. Jake's hand grasped at nothing. Time did not slow. It shattered. In the heartbeat between the push and the fall, the world changed. A light appeared where there had been none. It did not descend from the clouds or rise from the ground. It simply existed, suddenly. A soft radiance that seemed to have been there all along, but now revealed itself. It wrapped around the children like a breath, halting their downward motion in midair. Their boots hung above the precipice, inches from where the cliff face plunged. Snowflakes suspended around them, each crystal caught in that unexpected glow. Maria's breath caught. Her knees gave way, and she fell backward onto the snow. Eyes locked on the impossible scene unfolding before her. Between Emily and Jake, a figure formed, as if the light itself took shape. It was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, and yet somehow all of those things at once. Wings unfurled behind it, not feathery limbs, but vast, translucent veils that shimmered like auroras. Where feet should have been, there was only more light, anchored in nothing and resting on nothing. The face was not one face, but every face she had ever associated with kindness. A nurse who had smiled at her in the hospital, an old woman from church who had once slipped an extra loaf of bread into her bag. When it looked at her, she felt seen in a way that both comforted and terrified. Emily and Jake stopped falling. They hovered, weightless, their eyes wide, mouths parted. Fear drained from their features, replaced by something like wonder. "Ma'am." Emily's voice floated across the distance, clear as a bell. "Do you see it?" Jake reached out, small fingers brushing the shimmering air. "It's warm," he said, astonished. "It's so warm." Maria tried to speak, but her voice was gone. Far away, on the road where the forest ended, the truck driver who had seen them earlier pulled to the side because his vision blurred suddenly. Through the windshield, he saw, high above the river, a bloom of light, like dawn condensed into one spot. For a second, he thought it was some strange reflection, a trick of his tired eyes. Then he saw the outlines within it, the suggestion of wings, the faint silhouettes of two small forms held close, and his cigarette fell from his fingers. Closer to town, the man who had been smoking behind the trees looked up, drawn by a glow that did not belong to any streetlight. His breath caught in his chest. Later, when people asked him what he had seen, he would stammer and say, "It was like I don't know, like a piece of heaven got too close." On the cliff, the figure of light drew the children close. Emily's hair, loosened from under her hat, lifted gently in a wind that was not wind. Jake's cheeks, chapped and pale minutes before, now flushed with a gentle glow. The angelic, that was the only word that could fit the shape before her, looked at Maria. In its gaze there was no accusation, no fury, but neither was there indulgence. It was a gaze that held the weight of every consequence and every mercy ever woven together. "You cannot keep them from suffering by destroying their days," a voice said, not aloud, but deep inside her chest. "But I can take what you meant for despair and turn it into something else." Maria shook her head, tears streaming down her frozen face. I thought I wanted them safe," she choked out. "I know what you wanted," the voice replied, gentle and vast. "I know what the hunger and the cold and the silence have done to you. I know how thin your hope has become. But their lives are not yours to throw away." Then why? Her words dissolved into sobs. "Why are you taking them? Why now?" The angel turned its attention back to the children. Emily and Jake clung to its luminous form as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Because there are wounds on this earth that will never be healed by more days in the same darkness," the voice answered. "Because their suffering has shouted louder than your fears. Because sometimes mercy looks like an ending you were never meant to choose, but which I will redeem anyway." The light brightened, its edges blurring. The children's outlines softened. Maria tried to stand, to reach out, to scream for them to stay, but her legs refused to move. Her voice emerged as nothing more than hoarse gasps. "Emily, Jake," she cried. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Mom," Jake called, his voice both near and far. "It's not cold anymore." "We're not scared," Emily added, and she smiled, a small, radiant curve of lips that Maria would carry in her mind forever. "Don't cry, Mom. the angel rose. Or perhaps the world fell away beneath it. Either way, the distance between the luminous trio and the cliff widowed. The wings unfurled wider, covering the sky for a heart-shattering instant. And then the light folded into itself, shrinking, dimming, becoming a single star that winked out, as if swallowed by the clouds. The snow fell again, ordinary and unremarkable. The wind howled its same old song. The cliff was empty. Maria collapsed fully onto the snow, her body racked with sobs that had nowhere to go. She pressed her hands into the frozen ground until her fingers ached, as if she could claw her way through the rock and reach the river below, as if her nails could scrape reality back to the moment before. Far behind her, a voice shouted. The truck driver had left his vehicle on the road and now stumbled through the trees, drawn by the sight he barely believed he had seen. The man from the edge of town followed, his breath coming in sharp bursts. They found her on her knees near the edge, hands bleeding from the cold, eyes empty and wild. "Mum," the driver shouted. "Are you all right? Where are the kids?" I thought I saw, they're gone," Maria whispered. "He took them." Her words dissolved into the wind. The emergency calls went out quickly. Police, search and rescue, an ambulance. The cliff filled with people, lights flashing blue and red against the white. Men in bright jackets lowered ropes over the edge, their voices calm but tense. They searched the cliff face, the river ice, the jagged rocks. They found nothing, no broken bodies, no footprints leading away, no cracks in the ice that would explain a fall. The questions came fast, sharp as sleet. "Where did they go, Mum? Did they slip? Did they run? Why were you out here with 2 young children in this weather?" Maria tried to explain. She told them about the light, about the figure in the air, about how the children had been lifted rather than dropped. She spoke of warmth, of a voice that resonated inside her bones. The words tumbled out in a mix of prayer and confession. The officers exchanged glances over her head. "Get her to the hospital," one of them murmured. "Hypothermia, and something else." In the weeks that followed, the town split into camps. Some believed the simplest theory. The children had fallen, their bodies carried away under the ice, trapped somewhere under the river's unforgiving current. Others clung to the whispers that spread from the truck driver and the man behind the tree stories, of a strange light in the sky, a shape that looked like wings, an impossible stillness in the air. The church saw a spike in attendance as people fumbled for answers. Some spoke of miracles, others spoke of madness. The only one who knew with the terrible certainty of the witness that both had been present on that cliff was Maria. She was charged with attempted murder. The court listened to her testimony, to the accounts of exhaustion and poverty, to the doctors who mentioned depression and delirium, to the shocked statements of those who had seen the strange glow. In the end, the legal system did what it could with something it did not fully understand. It sent her to a psychiatric facility under a complex web of treatment and supervision. The days in the hospital were slow and oddly warm. The radiators there worked too well. She slept under thin sheets and woke sweating, confused by a body that had forgotten what it meant not to shiver. Nurses brought medication in tiny cups. Doctors asked gentle, probing questions. "Do you believe your children are alive?" One asked. "Yes," she said. "Where do you believe they are?" She looked out the window at the pale winter sun. "Not here," she answered. She told no one about the dreams. In them, Emily and Jake ran through fields that did not belong to any landscape she recognized. The grass there was not green or yellow or brown, it was a color she could feel more than see, soft and forgiving under small, bare feet. A river ran nearby, its water warm and clear, the opposite of the icy ribbon that had carved their town in two. Sometimes she saw the angel too, though she never saw its face, only the shape, luminous and enveloping, the sense of a presence that could be both thunder and lullaby. In the dreams, Emily would wave. Jake would shout, "Mom, it's like summer all the time." Their laughter echoed in her chest long after she woke, tears wetting the pillow. She did not know if the dreams were mercy or punishment. Years passed. The town learned to talk about other things. New tragedies, smaller and more ordinary, took the place of the old one in daily conversation. Only on certain winter evenings, when the sky over the river glowed a little strangely, did anyone mention angels drop. Maria's hair streaked with gray around the temples. The sharp edges of her grief softened, not because the loss grew smaller, but because it became woven into her being like a scar that no longer bled, but still changed the way she moved. When the doctors decided she was stable, they moved her to a halfway house in another town, where the people did not look at her with eyes full of old headlines. She took small jobs, washing dishes in a cafe, folding clothes at a charity shop. She learned how to breathe without feeling that each inhale stole air from someone else. One Sunday, at the suggestion of a nurse, she went to a small church on the corner of a quiet street. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and candle smoke. The congregation was small, the hymns off-key, the sermon simple. She sat in the back pew, hands twisted together, listening to words she thought she had forgotten how to hear. Sometimes, the pastor said, grace looks like survival. Sometimes it looks like forgiveness. And sometimes it looks like a second chance you know you don't deserve. After the service, an older woman approached her. "You here," she said kindly. "Do you have somewhere to eat lunch?" Maria almost lied. Then she shook her head. The woman smiled and patted her arm. "Come with us," she said. "We always cook too much." The months that followed were quieter than any time in her life. She volunteered at a shelter that helped women and children. The first time she held a baby there, its weight soft and trusting in her arms, she nearly lost her breath. Tears spilled unbidden, and the child's mother, misunderstanding, said, "Not everyone has the patience for crying." She did not explain that it wasn't the crying that had broken her, but the sheer fact that this small life had been placed in her hands, even for a moment, as if the universe had decided, against all reason, to trust her again. It was at the shelter that she met Thomas. He was there to fix a broken window, his toolbox clinking as he crossed the hallway. He was a tall man, with shoulders bowed not by work, but by something older grief layered over time. A wedding band, dull with years of wear, sat on his finger even though there was no wife waiting at home. Cancer had taken her 2 winters earlier, one of the staff whispered. Maria watched him from a distance at first. He laughed with the children, made silly faces to distract them from the noise of the drill. His smile had a careful quality, like someone who had learned to build it again from memory. They spoke for the first time over a pot of coffee in the shelter's tiny kitchen. "You're here a lot," he said, nodding toward the door where another woman had just left, coat flapping. "Volunteer or staff?" "Volunteer," she answered. "You?" "Handyman. And I guess volunteer too. Hard to leave when the little ones are throwing tools at you." He smiled at his own joke, then sobered. "I like helping. It makes the house quieter when I go home." She understood that more than she said. Silence could be a blessing or a blade. They talked again the next week, and the week after. Conversations that started with shared tasks, fixing a broken chair. Sorting donations expanded into fragments of history. He told her about his wife, about the empty bed that still surprised him. She told him small pieces of her past, careful at first, then more freely when she realized he did not flinch or pry. When she finally told him about Emily and Jake, about the cliff and the light and the years in the hospital, he listened without interruption. He did not rush to fill the silence that followed. "I don't know what to do with a story like that," he admitted slowly. "I don't know if my mind believes all of it. But I believe you. I believe you saw something. And I believe," he paused, searching for words, "I believe that it didn't end there. Sometimes I wonder if I only made it up to survive, she confessed. If there was no light, no angel. If I just let them fall. He shook his head. Even if your mind filled in the gaps, what you did afterward matters. You didn't stay in that moment. You let God, or whatever name you want to give him, do something in you beyond it. Do I deserve any of this? She asked, gesturing vaguely at the room. The shelter, the warm coffee, his presence. He looked down at his hands, at the ring he still wore. Deserve, he repeated. If love only went where it was deserved, I think we'd all be very alone. They married in a small ceremony 2 years later. There were no elaborate decorations, no long aisle. Just a handful of people from the shelter, from the church, from the neighborhood. The pastor who had once preached about second chances stood before them, eyes shining. In the modest house they moved into, there was always enough. Enough food in the pantry. Enough wood for the fireplace in winter. Enough space for laughter to grow without echoing off bare walls. They did not become rich, not in the way the world measured wealth. But they had a refrigerator that was never completely empty, a roof that did not leak, a heater that worked when switched on. When a child joined their household, first a foster daughter, then a boy they adopted, Maria's heart expanded in ways that both frightened and healed her. She loved them with a ferocity sharpened by what she had lost. She told them stories at bedtime, though never the one about the cliff. Not yet. That story would come later, when they were old enough to understand that love and brokenness can live in the same chest. On winter nights, when the snow piled up against the door and the wind moaned through the trees, she would sit by the window, watching the flakes swirl under the streetlight. Sometimes, just for a moment, the light outside would seem to bend, to shimmer in a way that made her catch her breath. Once, when her new son was 6, the same age Jake had been, he pressed his small palm to the glass and said, "Mum, look. That snow looks like wings." She swallowed hard. "Maybe it is," she replied softly. In those moments, she did not think of herself as a woman rewarded for her worst act. She thought of herself as someone who had been dragged, kicking and screaming, out of a pit she had partly dug and partly fallen into. Someone whose children had been taken not as a prize for her choices, but as a strange and terrible mercy that she would never fully understand on this side of the sky. Back in the town where angels watched over the river, people still told stories. They spoke of a winter years ago when 2 children vanished and a strange light appeared in the sky. Some said it was a freak reflection, a trick of the atmosphere. Others swore, over time and cups of coffee, that it had been something more. On certain nights, when the moon hung low and the river glinted through breaks in the trees, parents would tuck their children into bed and whisper, "There are places where heaven feels closer. Be careful near the cliff." In Maria's new home, far from that edge, the winters felt different. The cold was still sharp, but it did not sink into her bones the way it once had. She wrapped scarves around her children's necks before they went out, reminding them not to stray too far, to stay where the streetlights reached. Sometimes, after the house fell quiet and Thomas snored softly beside her, she would slip out of bed and pad to the living room window. Outside, snow would be falling, transforming the world into the same white silence that had once almost swallowed her whole. She would press her forehead to the glass and close her eyes. "I know they're with you," she would whisper into the darkness. "I know they're warm. Let them know that their mother is trying, that she is not running anymore, that she does not forget them." In the stillness that followed, she felt no booming voice, no blinding light. Just a calm that settled low in her chest, a steadying presence that had learned, over the years, how to speak without words. She opened her eyes and watched a snowflake slide down the pane, leaving a faint trail of water. Somewhere beyond the clouds, beyond the weight of air and memory, 2 children ran along a shore that knew no winter. They laughed, the sound rippling through a light too bright to hurt. And if they paused sometimes and looked toward a world they had left, it was not with longing, but with a gentle, enduring love. And on a small street in a different town, a woman who had once taken them to the edge of a cliff, but could not take them out of the hands of God, stood in a warm room, hands curled around a mug of tea she did not have to ration, surrounded by a family she had not expected, breathing air she no longer believed she had stolen. It was not a perfect ending. There were still nights when grief found her, when the weight of what she had done and what had been done for her pressed so heavily that she had to sit down, but it was undeniably an ending shaped by something other than despair, an ending in which hunger gave way to enough, in which cold gave way to firelight, in which a heart that had once planned a tragedy learned, slowly and haltingly, to live under the quiet, persistent generosity of a God who had taken two children out of the snow and lifted their mother, too, into a life she had never dared to imagine.